again, family and friends. It's story time again. Hadasha Shulamite. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Today's story is coming from the Bible, as usual, and my story is based on the prophet Elijah. Now, Elijah was a good prophet, and from all accounts, he was a fairly young man. Why I said that? There was a time when he was running before the chariot with the king. He was in front running, and this is horses and this is a man, so he had to be in good shape and fairly young. Anyway, having said that, Elijah had prayed for it not to rain, and so there was a drought in Israel. And Ahab was king at the time, and Ahab, he wasn't too happy with Elijah because Elijah didn't prophesy the things that he wanted to hear. He was okay with his false prophets, and they told him what he wanted to hear. But yet, deep down, King Ahab knew that Elijah was a prophet of God, and so he feared him. But he still want to hear of his people. He preferred their prophesying their falsehood, but he was afraid of Elijah because he knew Elijah had the truth. So his wife Jezebel, most of us heard about Jezebel. She had slain hundreds of God's prophets, and she was a wicked woman. And so Elijah decided that they're going to do a sacrifice. So he said, okay, Ahab, you call your prophets and we're going to go up to Mount Carmel. Now, Elijah didn't accuse him of anything. He said, get your prophets and we're going to go on Mount Carmel and do the sacrifice there. And King Ahab got his prophets together, and Elijah went up there with his people to do the sacrifice on Mount Carmel. And so he let them go first. He said, okay, go ahead. Now they had to have 2 bullocks, and they had to be in perfect condition. They couldn't have been lame or had some kind of disease. You would think that, well, they're going to be burnt anyway, so let's take the ones that's sick or what. No, because this was sacrifice to God, and he gave the best. And when we're sacrificing anything, we're supposed to give the best, and that was the law. You had to sacrifice an animal that was in shape, that was in good condition, and whatnot. So anyway, they went up to Mount Carmel, and he said, go ahead. And so he and his false prophets, they got together and they built the altar and whatnot. And by a certain time, they're supposed to call on their God, and the sacrifice would be burnt and whatnot. So they did what they had to do, and they put the sacrifice there. They cut up the animal, how they had to cut it up and put it on the altar, and nothing happened. And they called on their God, Dagon, and all the gods that they knew, and nothing would happen. So Elijah, he said, maybe your God went on vacation or something. Call a little louder. Or maybe he's sleeping. Call him and wake him up. Elijah was messing with them pretty much, because he knew that they were not serving the true God. And they were crying out. They even started cutting themselves, with stones, and crying out to their God because, they want, how come the God not coming true? That's how Satan will make you believe in fiction, and they carried on and they cried out and they cut themselves and they were bleeding and they cried and they jumped and they're doing all kinds of stuff. And their God did not burn up the sacrifice. So it was Elijah's time, and Elijah said, okay, I guess your God is gone somewhere and he's not hearing you, so it's my turn to call on the true God. And so he built the altar. He got the 12 stones that represent the 12 tribes of Israel, and he built the altar, set it up a certain way that God told you everything what to do. And he did it. And he said, okay, now this is what I want you to do. He called his guys. He said, get barrels of water and wet the wood, wet the sacrifice 3 times. And he said, now fill the trenches around it. Fill everything. I want it soaking wet. I'm putting in my 2 words. I want everything wet. Because when God is going to do something, water, fire, nothing can stop him. And so they did. They got water and they wet the sacrifice. They wet the wood. They wet the ground around it and everything. And Elijah called on God. Said, let these people see who the true God is. And the fire came down from God and burned up the sacrifice. It burned up the wood. It even burned up the stones. That's to tell you, it burned the stones. It burned up everything. And the people fell on their faces, you know, the people that went with Ahab and the false prophets. And they said, God is God. This is the true God. And that's why the Bible said the time is going to come and every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ, he is Lord. No fake God can stand before him. And so what they did was all the false prophets were stoned. They were destroyed. And, you know, when Jesus came, he gave us a different way to do things. We did not have to burn sacrifices. We did not have to do that. All we had to do was ask for forgiveness. You know, he said if we confess, he will forgive us. And he would cleanse us from all unrighteousness if we ask him, but we have to ask. He don't do anything, force us to do anything. And so the proof was there that God, the real God, is Yahweh. We call him Jesus. We called him Emmanuel. But the true and living God, the creator, none can stand before him. And there was proof that day in the presence of Ahab, King Ahab and his people. Because Elijah said to them, he said, who is for God, come over here. And if you're not for God, you know, you can stay on that side. And many people, they believed God because when they saw that, you know, everything was soaking wet. Even the trench around the sacrifice, it was filled of water. And when he called on God, the true God, the fire came down and burned up the sacrifice because it was accepted of God, you know. And when I think about it, now, the devil, he can cause fire. He can. But when God is in charge, when he is on a mission, Satan has to step aside. He can't do nothing. He is paralyzed. He could not do anything because Satan can cause fire. But that day, no, God wasn't having it. God was in charge. And then Elijah called his servant because, like I said, there was no rain after all of this. And Elijah prayed for rain. And he told Ahab, he said, I hear a sound of abundance of rain. The sky was clear. There was no rain. There was not even a cloud. And Elijah prayed. And when he finished praying, he sent his servant and said, go and look. And he came back and he said there was nothing. And he prayed again. 7 times he sent that servant. And when he came back, he said, I see a little cloud about the size of a man's hand. And Elijah said, yep, it's going to rain. And it did rain. And we have to trust God. We have to trust his word. Because his word is truth and his word is life. And there is no darkness in God. If he says something, we can believe it. And we can believe his prophets. Because his prophets are always 100% correct. And that's how we know. The Bible says, prove all things whether it be true. Hold fast to that which is good. And so that's how we know. If I say, look, I'm eating this fruit and it's really sour. Yeah, you can, okay, yeah, it's sour. But unless you taste it for yourself, you can never know how sour or maybe how sweet it is. There are certain things that has to be proven individually. And that's how it is. We have to understand God for ourselves. We have to have a personal relationship with God ourselves. God bless you. Continue to read your Bible. Pray every day. Because why? Jesus is coming, and he's coming soon. Be blessed.